Thank you for the blessing that you give us as servants of you and your Son and the Spirit. Help us to be growing in our faith. Help us to understand the need for our patience, the need to be humble in the sight of you and of your plan. Watch over our souls as we struggle to serve in both seasons of confidence and uncertainty. Teach us in ways that push us to store up our treasures in heaven. And please forgive us of our sins. This is our open prayer in your Son's name. Amen. All right, so we are looking again at Song of Solomon. And there's a couple of things that we want to do to start tonight's look into the text. And number one is a few brief reminders about what we're getting into. Remember, with the Song of Songs, it is and should be thought of from a biblical literature side of things, some wisdom that is helping us understand the nature of human interactions, understand love, understand anticipation, understand the context of that relationship. There are at least two layers of the text that we've identified. One is the human layer, what we've been kind of focusing in on, which is the actual poetic relationship between our Shulamite woman and the king inside the text. This song is sometimes also called the song that is attributed to or in the style of or the Song of Solomon. From its internal context, I would suggest that it is more about that style than actually Solomon himself. And so we've got a royal king who is courting a young woman, and their love is obvious and open. Secondly, there's another layer to this, and sometimes we'll note this deep appreciation of genuine love that can also be seen not only in the marital context, which we're about to encounter in the text, but also in the other ways that God uses marriage to teach us about other relationships. And one of those is the relationship between Christ and the church. There's a key distinction. One of those is about those principles. The other is about the practicalities. So on the earthly level, these are practical love applications to actual people who are actually in love and actually approaching the relationship. With the application on a literary level to the church, we have to shift a little bit because there are some natures in the text that don't necessarily match fully. And so just be cautious if you're going to apply the Song of Songs, the greatest of the love songs, to the relationship between Christ and the church. There are some limits where it's not an absolute connection that you have to be aware of. Where we're at right now, in looking at the text, I want to begin to kind of dig into this passage with a reminder to the poetry of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And remember, something that's important about her backdrop is that before she meets her beloved, we find her as one who is dealing with physical injuries and stuff about her that have caused her to have an attitude and a perspective of not being worthy. She doesn't see herself in the early parts of her life of being worthy of living, of worthy of life, worthy of love. And in the relationship she develops with her beloved, her husband, all of that becomes realized in such a significant way that her attitude shifts, and it shows in her poetry. And I think it's important to understand because we look at her poetry and better appreciate how the human experience responds to emotions like we're about to encounter in this section of the Song of Psalm, which is about, in part, the consummation and culmination of the whole wedding environment, not just the marital bed, but the entire experience of being married is going to be explored here. And so understanding what she writes in her sonnet number 21, she's going to show to us here the delight of hearing this repeated affirmation of affection and how that affects someone. Much in the same way that we respond to positive or negative speech. This is an important general principle to think about. and I'm going to make a quick aside that's not direct in the text, but it's important to catch. The way you present the people you love and the people you care about to the people around you is testimony to the legitimacy of that care. So, if in a married couple, the husband constantly mocks the spouse's cooking abilities to everybody everywhere, that destroys the reality of their relationship. It breaks it down because it allows the wife to feel less. Just as much as if the table is turned and the wife constantly complains about particular aspects of her husband in a negative way. The same thing is true in all of our relationships. If you make mockery of the people you love to everybody around, then you have to question, do I actually love them? Or do I only love the idea of them? Or do I love them to be around me so I can make fun of them to make myself feel better? That's the contrast. And so Browning here talks about the impact on the positive side, where you're excited to be around each other and you're identifying the great attributes that make it wonderful to be in her space with her beloved. And so she writes, "Say over again, and yet once over again, that thou dost love me, though the word repeated should seem a cuckoo song, as thou dost treat it. Remember, never to the hill or the plain, valley and wood without her cuckoo strain. Comes the fresh spring and all her green completed, beloved I amid the darkness greeted. By a doubtful spirit voice in that doubt's pain, cry, speak once more, thou lovest, who could fear? Too many stars, though each in heaven shall roll, too many flowers, though each shall crown the year, say thou dost love me, love me, love me toll. The silver instants are iterants only minding, dear, to love me also in silence with thy soul." She is expressing just the mere thought of her beloved saying, I love you, is so significant and in essence pales to the stars, the flowers, the gardens, the skies. And all of the wonderment of that, repeated over and over again, is less than just the cry of her beloved, who repeats a song like a cuckoo clock that simply says, I love you. That's the backdrop of a lot of what we see now appearing to us in the text of Song of Songs. And it does so in ways that we've talked about already, where he is going to employ, the author and the poetic prose that's being brought forth, whoever is speaking at the time, they're going to use images that are relevant to their lives. And we talked about this last week in a very simple sense, that you're very often comparing things to what you know, and you're simply saying, this is better than that. This is the best of all the things. And so pay attention to that as we read through the text some, and begin to kind of understand that this relationship now established is about to move forward to its next inevitable phase. And key into things like we've talked about before, like pet names that describe the depth of a relationship, illustrations of their commitment to one another, and further there is the sense of anticipation. As a youngster, well under the age of 5, I can vividly remember one of our Christmas holiday periods where our family got together, and I think I was actually probably like 3.5, 4, and I got into the gifts underneath the tree before anyone else woke up. I was being myself, getting up and doing whatever was going on, and I started tearing into gifts for whomever. And just kind of seeing what was going on. I didn't sit down for a while after that, by the way. But the anticipation for what was in the boxes, I stole from my cousins. Because those gifts weren't for me, and I knew that in the end. I don't remember all of those events, but I eventually realized that. But what I actually took by my folly was all of the anticipation that they had and the wonderment of what was inside the wrapper of the gift. I think that's an important part to understand, that the song here is also going to show us the value of that anticipation again. That excitement actually makes the culmination better. It can take something that might have been unexpected and turn it into amazing. And so that anticipation comes up in the text quite a bit. And so here in the section, when we read through it, also pay attention to this idea flowing forward of the way in which each of them, both the Shulamite woman whose name is not given, and the king who we encounter, see each other in a sense of companionship. They begin the relationship, by the way, in an unequal standard. So the relationship starts with the perspective of the king being up here, and she perceives herself not being his equal. But gradually, you'll notice in the poetry, in the form of the text, she is pulled up to his level. She does a number of things that express her anxiety, and he provides comfort to say, you belong, this is your place, you should be here. And so that has taken place to build to this point in the relationship. Also, and I've kind of made note of this in a couple different ways, nowhere in the song itself is there an actual discussion of absolute morality. It exists in the assumption of the morals of its culture. And so an important thing to realize is that we're not going to turn to Song of Solomon and find the same kind of instruction that you find, say, in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, or in Matthew 19, where Jesus deals with specific questions about marital opportunities and divorce, because it's dealing with a different thing. This is showing us, again, God built and designed us for this part of the relationship of mankind. It is an extension of Genesis 2 and 3 that God made man male and female, and they are not only helpmeets to one another, they are suitable for one another, and that design includes both the spiritual connections that can be built, but also the physical ones. And so there's some of that here in the text as well. Right here, at least for us, there are three sections that I want you guys to think about. So we've got a couple of key ideas, and we're going to break it into three sections for our reading. Song of Songs, chapter 3 has verses 6 through 11, and then we're going to break the rest of the text going forward a little bit into chapter 4, verses 1 through 7 and following, where there's two things taking place. 6 through 11 really gives us the description of a royal wedding. And then when chapter 4 begins, there is the anticipation for the relationship to reach its culmination. So let's go ahead and work through the text a little bit and begin by reading together. And I'll read this part from Song of Songs, chapter 3, verses 6 through 11. What is that coming up from the wilderness, like columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with the fragrant powders of a merchant? Behold, is it the litter of Solomon? Around it are 60 mighty men, some of the mighty men of Israel, all of them wearing swords, an expert in war, each with his own sword at his thigh against the terror of the night. King Solomon made himself a carriage from the wood of Lebanon. He made its posts of silver, its back of gold, its seat of purple. Its interior was inlaid, catch it, with love by the daughters of Jerusalem. Go out, O you daughters of Zion, and look upon King Solomon with the crown with which his mother crowned him on the day of his wedding, on the day of the gladness of his heart. And so the picture there does something different than what we expect. Pretty much in American culture and in my experiences and maybe yours, weddings focus primarily on the bride. There's lots of good reason why that's the case. She is very often presented like the bride is pictured in the New Testament, with the relationship of Jesus, all gowned in white, and the whole purity picture comes into play, and that wonderment is there. Generally speaking, if you look at like prominence in the photographs and who's concerned about what, our culture really values that. And so all eyes turn to the bride when she enters in. We even cue it with music, right? How much effort is put into selecting everything that's going to lead up to the bride's selection of her entrance march, however that's going to be. Whether she's quietly standing in a judge's office or if it's a grand affair. We tend to think it's a big deal. In this context, though, it's turned, right? Everything is on, at this point here, on the groom. Now remember how the relationship was initially keyed. And we're going to look at each of these verses in a second. It's keyed in this unequal way. Our perspective then will say, well, shouldn't the bride be elevated? She will be. But here, from our cultural experience, the bridegroom is being treated like we would treat the bride. And so think about it that way, and maybe that also might, shift the way you personally see and understand this. And further, in the text that's going to come forward, particularly in chapter 4, their relationship is tied together in a little bit different way. They are referred to now as kinfolk with a brother-sister type of kinship in the poetic forms. That's uncomfortable in a poetic style for modern America, but it does fit here in the ancient Near East and this culture of them building a broader family concept. And furthermore, especially within the kingdom of Christ, our relationships are like that. You are both husband and wife and can be both brother and sister in that very tight-knit setting and relationship. Any key questions here in this first section? I want to identify a couple of key themes in a second, or extra comments, because the next chapter gets into another phase. All right, so moving forward, there are at least three themes that we're going to pay attention to as well. One, there is a significant emphasis again on that praise for the perception of beauty, how remarkable they are to one another. And through those eyes of love, every single defect that someone else might be recognizing no longer applies. I think I once heard it explained this way. All those little habits that you have that make you you, someone else might be annoyed by them, but your beloved rejoices in them. And you think back to the way that relationships go in life, that's how it is. The things that make you interesting to the other person, someone else may go, I don't know how I could endure that because it's not the right fit and there's not the right interest. And the love that is between the pair who are interested in each other isn't there to change the way we see those things. A note that's really obvious is those delightful attributes magnify their passion and their desire for each other. And then there's that mutual respect. Pause right here as well to understand that level of mutual interest that magnifies that passion and the desire is a point where wisdom can be applied. Because if you think more of the process of a relationship, where it starts where you're getting to know each other, and then you become comfortable with one another, and those interests magnify that passion and desire, wisdom that comes to respect one another gets applied in order to allow it to wait until the appropriate time, to explore and engage in the consummation when you're married. And so you know that beforehand, it's the period of waiting and anticipation and waiting for the day to unwrap the gift that is the relationship. All right, so we'll pause here and also insert some things of interest, at least to me, that are important. Some of the things that are noteworthy, that are kind of biblical themed across the scape of it. When Solomon arrives, he arrives in the picture of coming up from the wilderness like columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense. Is that familiar in any way? Anything with frankincense and myrrh take place in the Bible once or twice? Yeah, it certainly attaches to Jesus, attaches to the Old Testament, but also the columns of smoke. This is all kind of imagery that attaches to the status of King Solomon, and our literary King Solomon here. That, hey, he's king. And they see him from afar off. Now, the distance of the smoke is kind of more literalized because of his ratoon who are with him. He's got his gang. his posse is with them. We might think of our bride and the groom, and then they've got their best men and their attendants on both sides, and the groomsmen. Well, Solomon here has a whole passel of them. These are our warriors who come in with him, demonstrating whom he is and defending the image of whom he is. Also understand that the word carriage here, or the litter that's being defined, it's interesting to note that the king made this for them. It's a bride gift. This is something that is going to be given to her to represent that she is special. So all eyes turn to the king, but there's something missing in the procession. And they're going to go get her and place her in that special spot. Because remember I talked about how he is going to raise her up to his level? That's going to be visually taking place here. All right, so that moves us to chapter 4. This is another one of those poetic sections that it's really important to kind of, again, interpret it in the way in which a song would be today. And pick your era. The music of your youth has songs that sound just like this. If you like Luther Vandross, a lot of his songs sound like chapter 4. If you want to go into the 80s, most of the power ballads by the rock groups sound like this. You go back into songs through antiquity, you can find genre-stretching songs that all have this same level of open and appropriate appreciation for the person they love. There's a lot of great stuff by Harry Connick, if you like jazz. They're all the same thing. And so keep that in the concept that that's exactly what's taking place here in this idea of appreciation of the relationship. So let's go ahead and right now read through just verses 1 through 7 of chapter 4. And we'll put a little pause there before we go further into the text. Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are dove behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats leaping down the slopes of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes that have come up from the washing, all of which bear twins. And not one among them has lost its young. Your lips are like a scarlet thread, and your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David built in rows of stone. On it hang thousands of shields, and all of them shields of warriors. Your two breasts are like fawns, twins of a gazelle that graze among the lilies. Until the day breeze and the shadows flee, I will go away from the land of myrrh and the hill of frankincense. You are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you. Now again, I've vividly remember the first time reading through the Song of Solomon. And then I also vividly remember sitting in a Bible class with Melvin Curry, and he read that particular section where the poet for Solomon says, your hair is like a flock of goats. And no matter what you do, that doesn't sound the same to me as it clearly did to them. Because I don't think anybody should be, in the modern context, comparing their spouse's hair to a flock of goats. Unless their spouse loves that. See, that's the shift. These two understand each other, and the poetry matches the context of their lives. And so it becomes special because it does resound and reverberate into the nature of their relationship, and it does connect to who they are. And I can understand, and I can picture, okay, that's really coming down the rolling hills, and it's bounding and leaping, and it creates the picture of curls moving in the wind and the way in which a person's hair can move that way. Further, by the way, the picture of having a full set of teeth, you've got to put yourself in context. This is before modern dentistry, and history shows that in the ancient Near East, having all your teeth was actually an uncommon thing. And so this picture of her teeth being not only pure white, but also abundantly all there, hits a little bit differently when you kind of put that in context. But that's not even the image. It's not that she has teeth. It's that it's part of her beauty. That this is the entire package of how he sees her. One other thing that's important is that in the way the song lays this out, none of these structures are culturally explained in great detail. There's no dimensions or shape to the form. What's given is to the king, to Solomon, as written for us, she's beauty. She is the full epitome of what he considers beauty to be. Not compared to anybody else, by the way. That's the other neat thing about the way that this section of the poetry works out. It's not like you're the best of the litter. It's simply, you're the best. And everything that's being compared to is compared to the creation around her rather than other people. And that's an important thing that I want to pay attention to real quick. American culture, modern 21st century culture, has created a very distorted view of beauty. It's probably been a while for you all, but most of us have been to a movie in the movie theaters before, right? Most of them are kind of closed now. But we've all been to a modern movie where they've gone through all the entire processing of editing and making everything look just perfect. Do you understand how much work goes into making an actor or an actress look perfect on the screen? Here's something interesting. They hired before I think back in 2019, an actor to portray one of the supervillains in an upcoming Marvel movie. He was given a year to prepare for that role. And he was part of the contract he signed to get ready for that role, included almost $1 million to provide for his diet, his exercise regimen, and his entire skincare regimen to transform him from the average-looking human that he was with very great acting abilities into the anticipated superhero, supervillain body type. Very low body fat, excessively muscular, and really a specific physique that they were looking for. And so his job for a year prior to starting the filming of the movie was to look like a cartoon superhero. That skews your perception and my perception of what things should look like. And you might think, well, wait a minute, that's a superhero movie. We know they're supposed to look that way. Every single movie and television show does that. They have a staff of people who engage in the practice of skewing our perception of what people should look like. Now that's important right here because it would skew our anticipation of what love and what relationship and what attraction will look like. Because if we accept the veneer of reality that comes through media, where they have photoshopped everything and they have removed every blemish from every person's body, digitally and physically that they can, there is no way that us normal people who do not have $1 million budget every year to maintain our health will ever look like that. Because not only do all of that take place beforehand, after the movie is filmed, editors sit down and fix everything to make it perfect. To fix the lighting, to adjust the angles, to make it where there is no instances of people not looking like what they want it to look like. That's not here in the text. That's a powerful thing, that there's no comparative basis of you are prettier than all the others in this section of this relationship. It's matured to the point where her beauty is her beauty. And it blocks out everything else. I think that's important for us to pay attention to. It's a valuable truth to see in the text. It's also part of the way that we've been designed. God built us in that way. This is another illustration where the world's methodology is to simply shift God's plans into a distorted form or variation of what was a normal and natural thing. Some of the things that are included here, by the way, the physical illustrations that come from creation are a mixture of images. two halves of a pomegranate, the goats that are coming down from the hillside, the Tower of David. They have at least two aspects. One, in the culture that they were in, there's a deep understanding and appreciation that these are well understood illustrations of beauty. These are magnificent in their eyes. But they also have connected with them, and you may have noticed this, levels of fertility, which are an important thing in the context of these people's lives. In the culture of Jesus, and in the culture of David, and in the culture of Solomon, one of the most prized aspects of a person's space wasn't the gold that they had. It wasn't the land that they had. It was their families. Think back to the text of Job. What's the last thing that gets stripped from Job as the last attempt to take the last thing that's the most important to him? His children, right? And his wife turns to him and has that it had to have been the deepest low for Job. You think about it on a personal level. Why don't you just curse God and die? At that level of, why are you still fighting for this? Everything is over. And you can see she's broken too. Like, this is not a judgment to her to say that. This is an understanding that they've had everything stripped from them. The last precious possession was their family. And then when everything is restored and goes abundant, it's not just more stuff, it's a larger family afterwards. And the blessing that was to Abraham was a large family. And the blessing to the kingdom of God is a whole family. And so this picture that is a mixture of fertility and abundance is certainly in that same way. And so Solomon is appealing to those things because they're important to him. And they're very likely important to her too, and so that ties that together. The text continues when we pick up in verse 8, and this is going to bring us through the first verse of chapter 5 as well. And it reads this way. Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. Come with me from Lebanon. Depart from the peak of Amana, from the peak of Sinner and Hermon, from the dens of lion, from the mountains of the leopards. You have captivated my heart, my sister, my bride. You have captivated my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than any spice. Your lips drip nectar, my bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue. The fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. A garden locked is my sister, my bride. A spring locked. A fountain sealed. Your shoots are like an orchard of pomegranates with its choicest fruits. Henna with nard. Nard with saffron, calamus, and cinnamon. With all the trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloe, and with choice spices. A garden fountain, a well of living water, and flowing streams from Lebanon. Awake, O north wind, and come, O south wind. Blow upon my garden. Let its spices flow. And she responds, let my beloved come to his garden and eat its choicest fruits. I came to my garden, my sister, my bride. I gathered my myrrh with my spice. I ate my honeycomb with my honey. I drank my wine with my milk. Eat, friends, drink, and be drunk with love. So the picture that began in part with this visualization of her wonderment in his eyes then steps to, again, another image of a garden. And it's, again, enticing with its spring-like theme. And there's a couple of key things that kind of show us what's going on. One of the things that's quite obvious is that every one of these physical plants that are given to us are aromatics, in that they have distinctive and identifiable smells connected to them. And they're all uniformly seen as pleasant and desirous. And so this is all laid out as he's describing his anticipation and his excitement. He knows that all of that is there. In the poetry, it says all this fragrance is there. And then an unlocking moment takes place when the winds blow. And so it's like all the pollen that drops in the spring when our whole world around us turns yellow. That's the kickoff that we know that, at least in this area, you won't be able to breathe for about 7 or 8 months. Well, in this case, he can't breathe either. But he can't breathe because he's drunk with love. He's overwhelmed by all of this. And so it's all in the anticipation. This could be perceived in a very simple sense as the wedding day that's going to turn to the wedding night. And all of that excitement is not just his, it's theirs. And it's been planned and awaited, and the expectation has really reached its culmination. The picture here also is continuing with this same illustration of the big sights and the big scenes, because the image that starts it off, this whole kind of valley setup, is some of the most scenic areas in the Israelite valley space. These are the most stunning views. And so in essence he is saying, and the poet is giving us this picture, she is the most stunning thing he has ever seen. And every attribute that was described earlier in its physicality is now overlaid with the garden picture. And she is the garden. And they become the garden in its fullest sense, drunk so well in their appreciation for one another. I love the illustration here in verse 9. I think it's a great way in which we can kind of catch the sense of everything. You have captivated my heart, my sister, my bride. You have captivated my heart with one glance of your eyes. So I think we can see that on a number of levels. This is one of those things where I can ask you this question. Has your parent ever looked at you with just one specific look, and you knew exactly whatever you were doing was the dumbest thing you had ever done that day or in your life, just because of the way they looked at you? Like his eyes cut across the table and you're like, I know I am in trouble. This is the opposite of that. One look from your beloved, and everything else shuts down. You have some form of emotional auditory exclusion and you can't hear anybody else. Everything else around you doesn't matter anymore. The clock doesn't seem to actually have any impact on your life. That's the level of full immersion into each other that you see here. And by the way, it's a good key. A lot of times folks will ask the simple questions: how do I know if this person is the right fit for me? If this is a person who really is someone that I should be around and I'm trying to build that relationship. You're looking for things like that, where it shuts down your ability to see anything else. There's a common little factoid that, generally speaking, when a young couple weds, that husband and that wife are kind of useless for about a year. It's not because they can't be productive. They are. They go about their jobs. They have a good experience, providing for themselves. But they don't want to do anything else but be around each other. They're so enamored with each other, and the newness of the relationship is absorbing every ounce of that time. And you're looking in part for that kind of spark to know, hey, this is what we see as God's design for the relationship. Two more key-ins. One of this is all these kind of pictures here of plants, flowers, fruits. They're very simple metaphors. They have both a auditory and a sensory aspect of them, sometimes the sounds, sometimes the sights, the smells, but they're a very obvious, a physical level of eros there. That these are attractive, and they represent different aspects of both the physical form and the physical relationship. And they're generally fairly on point. If you can read it in the English language, you're catching what the poet is laying down without any kind of real confusion there. the final aspect of the text that comes up here in the closing part of verse 1 is a group kind of recognition. The idea here that is being given is that this statement that comes from the others, it's not from the spouse side either of the table, is really an encouragement to seek out this kind of relationship. If your desire is marriage, then enjoy what marriage offers. It's a companion to the idea of Ecclesiastes, where that you enjoy what God gives you, and this part of the relationship in marriage should be enjoyable. I think there's an important balance that needs to come in life to realize that this relationship outside of the context of marriage is unlawful, but within it, it's very lawful. It's expected, anticipated, it's biblical. And I think perhaps the strongest kind of theological application of this section of the text is very simple. That a good understanding is that the gift of this relationship between man and woman is one of the things that God has blessed us with. That's why it's so important to protect it. That's why it's so important to build it and to sustain it. It's part of the blessings of being made in the way that we are. And both the physical and emotional sides, the sexual sides, all of those things are incorporated into that great perspective from the text. Before we close tonight, we've got about 2 or 3 minutes. We're going to have Wednesday next some additional kind of consideration of an important aspect that we highlighted a little bit, is that we need to build a mindset that sees beyond physical beauty, partially because of the distortion that exists in American society and in modern society, where there is a very plastic or fake anticipation, whether that fake anticipation is found in movies, which are kind of sold as not a big deal, or in the things that are really morally destructive, like pornography or sexual suggestive advertising. Those things have to be torn down. At the same time, the Bible shows that relationship and intimacy is more than physical attractiveness. And we're going to take a little bit of time as part of next Wednesday's study. We'll move in the text a little bit too, to understand that there's more that draws people together than they are attractive to me because of the way God built them. And that comes across in the text. It comes across in the Proverbs. It comes across in the entire scope of biblical literature. And so we're going to look at those things Wednesday night as well. Any questions or quick comments, though? All right, then I want to thank everyone for class tonight. We're going to close with prayer, and then after our prayer, we'll have a few brief announcements. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we thank you for what you have done for us in our lives. We thank you for the blessing of understanding, the blessing of your word, the blessing of relationships, and we ask that you give us insight to place each of them in their proper sphere. Help us to be good stewards. Help us to be servants. Please forgive us of our sins and help us to see that as renewed creations, we are suitable and capable to fully be part of the kingdom and part of every blessing you have planned for us. Please watch over the souls of so many who are suffering for many reasons, both through physical affliction and spiritual trial. Help them to see you and your Son and the Spirit as active in their lives. And please help us to see heaven. And this is our prayer in your Son's name. Amen.